All right, this is the copyright disclaimer. The copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Fair use, fair use, fair use.
I'm writing an album called The Middle Passage. They've shown us every plantation with cotton on it. You know what plantation they've never shown us, Abby? The most prominent ones. The ones that were most profitable. The breeding plantations. Why don't you want to show us those? You know why? Because after the research that I did for this album, you realize that the moment that a girl menstruated, she was put in a stable where a horse would be and forcibly mated, forcibly raped by a male of the slave master's choice. And when she had children, they weren't called children, they were called a litter of pups. The punishment for raping or killing a person in medieval Spain is gelding. Gelding is when you take hot pincers and you take a man's balls and dick off root and stem. Killing a person, law of the Bible, right? Medieval Spain, super religious. You killed a man, he should be killed. Why were indigenous and black people categorized as subhuman? So under the law, you would not be punished for the things that you did to us. That's why. You used to be proud, right? Used to be proud, white America, of rape and murder. Used to be proud of colonization. Used to, wow, that made us tough. And then you got ashamed of it. And that's what you're dealing with. That's what America's dealing with, a schizophrenic crisis. There's a British manual, right, that was taken out of the British Museum because within the manual it talked about how rape was a weapon of war that should be used against the indigenous population. You're ashamed of that now. You're ashamed, right? Who was Christopher Columbus? His image has been so whitewashed, but he was trafficking little girls on an island. Who does that sound like, huh? All you right-wing defenders of Christopher Columbus and his legacy, he was trafficking 9-year-old indigenous girls on an island. Who does that remind you of, you intellectual coward? Just because liberals are dog shit doesn't mean that you shake hands with the devil. I'm writing.
So forced reproduction is making sure that enslaved women are continuously giving birth, those that are in the age range of being fertile. Enslavers waited to find out when a young girl had her first menstrual cycle. They were like literally wanting to know. Sometimes they would force people to have relations and they would say that you two, we've selected you two to breed with one another. And imagine for a woman and a man, if they have other partners, that they are considered that's their husband or their wife. The enslaver didn't care about that. They were looking at the body, the stock, the physique, all of that. They literally paired two people up, locked them in a cabin and said, until we see evidence of pregnancy, you're going to be whipped 30 lashes a day.
It's unspeakable.
It is.
And yet we have to speak about it.
We have to speak about it because we haven't. People are in denial at how prevalent this was. And I think to even say that this was breeding is an important statement to make.
Yes.
Because the construct of race made black women's children innately enslavable, enslavers were assured a profit with every birth. And that assurance became even more important in 1808 after Congress banned the importation of Africans to the United States. With the supply of newly enslaved people from Africa cut off, enslavers had to rely on a single source to replenish their essential labor force, the wombs of black women. The numbers are staggering. In 1790, the first United States Census counted just under 700,000 enslaved people. By 1860, despite the congressional ban that had been in place for more than half a century, the enslaved population had blossomed to nearly 4 million. And the rape of black women by white men played a significant role in that increase. Rape was so prevalent during slavery that today a quarter of the genetic makeup of black Americans can be traced back to Europe through the paternal line.
Someone who was a livestock seller to turn into a slave trader. These people had a very, very dark mindset. Slave breeding was an entire industry. Some states, especially Virginia, relied on slaves as their main source of income. The price of slaves varied based on the industry that invested in slaves for the production of sugar, rice, cotton, and tobacco. Because of the constant territorial expansion, a lot of white families needed more slaves. As long as the need for enslaved labor was going strong, slave breeders could literally make a fortune by forcing slaves to reproduce. White women would pick strong and healthy enslaved black men either for their own personal satisfaction or to force them to have sex with women and get them pregnant. These white women didn't care if the enslaved man had to sleep with his sister, mother, or daughter. If he fits the profile, then he would make an excellent breeder. White women preferred young and able farm men. An excellent physique provided a better bargain. These men were forced to produce more and more children so their masters could sell them at a high price. If the man resisted, he would either be severely punished or killed. Here is how the industry worked. A 1662 law known as Partus Sequitur Ventrum stated that if an enslaved mother gave birth to a child, that child would inherit the status of a slave. If the mother was free, then her child would also be born free. Reproducing was critical when white supremacists wanted to increase the number of slaves they had. More slaves meant more labor, more money, and money equals power. This became a crucial practice, especially after 1808 when the international slave trade was banned. White people had to use any means necessary to maintain a high number of slaves without the transatlantic slave trade. So, men sexually assaulted black women to procreate, while white women often forced their slaves to increase their numbers. The children would be sold on the market as valuable commodities or raised on farms and plantations as laborers. In many cases, white women would take these kids away from their parents and bring them into the big house. The children would be made to serve. If they wanted to sell these children, then they would create this feeding regimen and control everything the children ate. If the children were seen as valuable stock, then the white woman would give them medicine like Jerusalem oak. This product was used to treat parasites like worms. If the child was not fit enough, then white women would force them to run around the farms and race with other black children. This was a test to see who would be the fittest. This practice ensured that the children would fit the criteria for extended labor and sell for a good price. Many of the young boys were also kept in the breeding farms and forced to reproduce, just as their fathers and mothers were forced before them. In some cases, white women would make black women and men watch their children go through the same traumatic ordeal. This created generational trauma. It is very hard to figure out exactly how valuable these enslaved people were, but here are some rough estimates. In 1860, the total value of enslaved people in America was $4 billion. This was much higher than the total value of all the gold and silver in the country, which was $228.3 million. It was more valuable than all the money in circulation priced at $435.4 million, and even all the farmland in the South worth $1.92 billion. To slave owners, enslaved people were the most valuable asset, worth more than all these other things combined. Southern slave owners would take out loans using their enslaved people as collateral. Banks would then turn these loans into bonds and sell them to investors worldwide, even in places where slavery was illegal. Wealthy plantation owners would start new banks in states like Louisiana and Mississippi. They would write down a list of slaves that planters could mortgage. This allowed them to buy more enslaved people and expand their cotton farms. To fund these loans, the bank sold the bonds to other rich people in New York, London, Paris, and Amsterdam. The investors didn't technically own the slaves. They owned the bonds that were backed by the value of these slaves. In modern finance, this process is called securitization. It was the perfect ploy to make more money. Without
Let's cut the shit. Slavery in America wasn't just about forced labor. It was about forced birth. America didn't just work enslaved people to death. It bred them. And not like people, like livestock. If the transatlantic slave trade was a kidnapping, breeding plantations were the farm. And I said what I said. After the transatlantic slave trade was banned in 1808, the U.S. had a problem. They still wanted the free labor, but they had no more legal supply. Their solution? Turn black wombs into factories. Breeding plantations, and yes, they were called that, were designed specifically to reproduce more enslaved people. The goal wasn't to grow food, it wasn't to pick cotton. It was to force women to give birth to more product. Because that's what we were. Products. Black women weren't seen as mothers. They were uteruses with a resale value. Their fertility, that was the commodity. And their babies, assets on a ledger. Let's be real. This was organized. Some enslavers forced women to have 10, 12, 15 children. Not out of love, but out of cold-blooded capitalism. Some kept track of their pregnancies like breeding dogs. Black girls, as young as 13, were to kickstart their production. If they couldn't reproduce, they were often whipped, sold, or killed. And don't you dare forget about the men. Black men were used as studs. That's literally the word they used. They were, too, forced to mate with women chosen by their enslaver, sometimes their own family, sometimes multiple women in a row. Consent was a fantasy, trauma was the norm. And the goal was always profit. Virginia, Maryland, and parts of North Carolina became baby farms for the Deep South. And once those babies hit a certain age, they were sold down the river, often with chains still attached to their mother's arms. This is the legacy that birthed America's wealth. Families like the Talos, the Ball family, and others made millions off of children born from these violent systems. Wall Street was built to insure and trade these bodies. And if you're wondering why Black women still aren't believed about our pain, while we're 3 times more likely to die in childbirth, this is the root. Doctors experimented on those same women without anesthesia. Gynecology was literally founded on the abuse of Black wombs. So no, slavery wasn't just labor. It was a full-blown human breeding industry. And if that makes you uncomfortable, it should, because America wasn't built by accident. It was built with intentional, systemic, with generational torture passed off as policy. And the fact that you can visit some of these plantations today and see wedding venues instead of crime scenes, that tells you everything about what this country values. Not justice, not truth, just comfort for white folks. But we're not going to be quiet about it. We're not going to soften the language anymore. And we're not going to let the history die just because they're ashamed of it. This happened, and now they're going to hear about it every damn time we speak.
This is the book of Obadiah, chapter 1, verse 10, and it reads, For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. Giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Rahach HaKodash, Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well in teaching me this 100% truth. Salutations to them and my fellow Akim who labor in this truth week in and week out on the highways and byways. Also, salutations to the hopeful elect of the scattered 12 tribes of Israel, scattered to the four corners of the earth, that be like unto the speckled bird, also known as your Israelite foreigners, and your so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. To you, I say Shalom. This is your brother Ayashar Barzal from the Indianapolis branch of the Great Millstone, coming back at you with another lesson that is edifying to the elect body of the nation of Israel. All right, this is yet another installment of our camp series called For Thy Violence Against Thy Brother Jacob, where we go through the treacherous, relentless, brutal, demonic history of Esau, Edom, and how he has inflicted that upon the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and the Native Americans who are, mainly Israelites here in captivity. And we do have definitely, we're spread across all over the globe, according to Deuteronomy 28 and 64. We'll be scattered to the ends of the earth. And we're all over the place, but primarily our largest concentration is here in Babylon, aka America. And, today's topic is going to cover the slave plantation breeding farms. And you just saw a plethora of videos where, yeah, this bastard didn't quit. Even with the abolishment, it was so much money made off of it. But I want to address a couple of things in the video clips that preceded this lesson. And one of them, and we keep telling you, Jake, especially you Israelite women, okay, you do not have seed, okay? A nation is established by the seed of the father. That woman said in that clip that those slaves that were bred by the slave masters traced back to the paternal side of their fathers. Okay, same like here today. All these shows that you all see, they're looking for the father, not the mother. Okay, you do have an impact on what the child looks like, but you do not have an impact on what the child is. Okay, and that child's nationality is established by his father. Okay, so let me get that in Numbers 1 and 18. I'll come back to the article. Book of Numbers, chapter 1, verse 18. And it reads, "And they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month, and they declared their pedigrees after their families by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names from 20 years old and upward by their polls." Okay, your pedigree, nationality, is determined by the father. Okay, hence, when all the young children were born in Egypt, Pharaoh gave the decree to slay all the males that were born and keep the females. You kill the males so that you could get rid of the nation and breed them out. Okay, that's why that happened. Okay, so once again, whatever the father is, that's what the child is. Point blank, period. No such thing as biracial, regardless of what the child looks like. All right? Get that through your thick heads. All right? She made that very clear. And if they knew that then, all right, and we're telling you that now, it is the truth. Okay? It's backed up by the scriptures. When you go through the lineage of all the great men, they follow the line of their fathers. Why do you think there's no tribe of Dinah? Yeah. You don't hear about it. She was one of the. She was the sister of the men of the 12 tribes. But there's no tribe of Dinah. She doesn't have any seed. Okay. So let's get that point straight right there. Okay. And another point I wanted to point out. In one of those documentaries, you Edomite women, so-called white women, had a huge hand in that breeding, as saw as seen in that one documentary. All right, you're not going to be absolved from your sins either. All right, you will not be absolved from your sins. This is the book of Psalms, chapter 109, and beginning in verse 13. And it reads, and this is talking about the wicked, the nation of Edom, according to Malachi 1 and 4. All right. You can get that in context at the very beginning of this chapter. It says, let his posterity be cut off, and in the generation following, let their name be blotted out. Okay, and posterity literally means from the progenitor of a nation to the furthest descendant of that said nation. So he said, let it be cut off. Let their name be blotted out. There will come a time where Esau Edom, the so-called white man, will no longer exist on this planet. All right? But there's something you have to do first. Okay? Before that happens. You know, in the opening scripture, Obadiah 1 and 10, verse 18, repeats this. All right? Back in the Psalms 109, verse 14, it says, let the iniquity of his fathers be remembered with Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, and let not the sin of his mother be blotted out. So all the things you had your hand in, you Edomite women, you know, that resulted in the death and defilement of the Israelites, you will be recompensed as well. All right? You're going to have to pay for those sins. It says right here, let not the sin of his mother be blotted out. No, it's not going to be ignored. You're going to have to pay. All right? Right along with the Edomite man as a nation, just like Obadiah 1 and 18 says. All right? It says, verse 15, let them be before Yahweh Bashem Yahushai continually, that he may cut off the memory of them from the earth. There it is again. Back-to-back scriptures. Once you all have finished your servitude and slavery, you know, you will be out of here for good. The world is sick of you right now. All right? Even though you keep projecting that shit onto us. They know who the real problem is. They just don't want to face, you know, the people that they despise, you know, for centuries. But you are going to be out of here. Let me get that in Obadiah 1 and 18, just to bring that home. All right? Then we'll get into the article. And it reads, it deals with all the heathens, beginning at verse 15, but I'm going straight to the point. All right? It says, and the house of Jacob shall be a fire. That's the southern kingdom. And the house of Joseph a flame. That's the northern kingdom. And the house of Esau for stubble. And they, that's the southern and northern kingdom, come back as one nation, as according to Ezekiel 37, shall kindle in them and devour them. And there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau. For Yahweh Bahashem Yahushai have spoken it. So yeah, live it up. You know, we see you guys gaslighting on the Carmelo Anthony verdict. You know, it's interesting how that murder weapon went for a cleat, went from a cleat sharpener to a whole knife. You know, yeah, we're paying attention. We're paying attention. All right, but here again, like the scriptures say, the Lord says, vengeance is his, and it's going to be epic. Yep. And be by the hand of his people. So that's with those first two clips. Now let's get into the article. All right, and I'll put a link to this article in the description box. It says, America's Breeding Farms. What History Books Never Told You is by William Spivey. I got it from this site called Medium. All right. It says in 1808, America banned the import of slaves from Africa and the West Indies. The impact on actual slavery in America was almost non existent. There was still some limited smuggling of slaves, but the majority of new slaves in America came from what Professor Eric Foner called natural increase. One could reasonably ask, why ban slave imports and not slavery itself? The answer is because for many of the proponents of the prohibition, including Thomas Jefferson, the reason was not based on humanitarian concerns, but on economics. And I'll stop right here. Thomas Jefferson, in his letter to Virginia regarding the slaves, when I'm roughly paraphrasing, I tremble for my country, for he know that God is just and doesn't sleep forever. To the tune that, hey, he knew at some point in time, America is going to have to answer for what they did to us in slavery. Okay? And although he knew this, he still had slaves. But he'll be back too. All right? It says, the South was producing and selling enough slaves internally that the slave trade was reducing prices for slaves and cutting into profits. It says in 1819, another act was passed allowing U.S. ships to not only patrol its own shores, but the coast of Africa in an attempt to stop slave ships at the source. Not for concerns about ending slavery, but in protectionism for American slave owners. And that's what it was all about. Okay? When reparations was paid out, it was paid to slave owners for loss of property after the Emancipation Proclamation and the slaves were freed. Okay? So when you hear them say reparations was paid, that's what they're talking about. All right? It says everything was contingent on the fact that there was a self-sustaining population of about 4 million slaves in America at that time. Southern legislators joined with Northern ones in passing both the acts that banned the external slave trading but ignored slavery. Once again, North and the South were no different. Just like Democrats and Republicans were no different. Today's Republicans are yesterday's Democrats. Okay? When you go back, I think we did a video on this one not too long ago. The Devil's Punch Bowl in Natchez, Mississippi. Those were Union soldiers that did that, not Confederate. Okay? So it all comes down to Esau Edom, the so-called white man, regardless of what title he has. He is still no damn good. As the scriptures say, let me see, I think that's Ecclesiastes 8:20 or 7:20. Let me try 8. No, there's no, so 7:20. No, it's not that one. 13. Okay. Consider the work of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. For who can make that straight which he hath made crooked? Okay. And we know that Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel, upright, we're the ones that straight. Okay. But he made Esau crooked. There's another one in Job. I think it's 14:4. God, who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? Not one. All right. He made you as the wicked. He made us as the righteous. Okay. So you can have Republican, Democrat, whatever fucking title you desire. That's not going to change how he created you. All right. Point blank, period. Let's get back to that article. It says, most of us are aware that slave owners often bred their slaves to produce more workers. We are taught almost nothing about the breeding farms whose function was to produce as many slaves as possible for sale and distribution throughout the South to meet their needs. Two of the largest breeding farms were located in Richmond, Virginia, and Maryland Eastern Shore. And the Maryland Eastern Shore. As far as cities I've never lived in, I've spent as much time in Richmond, Virginia as anywhere. I travel there multiple times a year, often for a few days or a week at a time. Richmond is serious about most of its history. I visited the Edgar Allan Poe Museum. Monument Avenue contains several statues, mostly of Confederate Civil War heroes. Stonewall Jackson, Jefferson Davis, J.E.B. Stuart, and Robert E. Lee are honored there, as is the late African-American tennis star Arthur Ashe, who was from Richmond. Okay. It says in August 2017, Richmond Mayor LeVar Stoney said Richmond would consider the potential removal of the statues glorifying the legacy of the South after issues raised in nearby conflicts and protests involving white supremacists. One major part of Richmond's history is barely remembered, hardly spoken of, and taught publicly nowhere. Richmond is a port city and exported between 10,000 to 20,000 slaves a month to states further south and west. Slavery, not tobacco, was Virginia's primary domestic crop. You may have seen scenes of slaves being offloaded in New Orleans, for example. They were more likely to have come from Richmond around Florida than from Africa. You never hear of the names of the industry leaders. Robert Lumpkin ran his jail, which was a compound surrounded by a 12-foot fence with iron spikes. Should a slave escape, by law, the Fugitive Slave Act guaranteed they would be returned, courtesy of the federal government. See, there you go. The same government that Jake is begging reparations from is the same government that had a hand in our demise as it stands today. Okay? It says the slave population of the breeding farm was mostly women and children not old enough to be sold, and the limited number of men whose job was to impregnate as many slave women as possible. The slaves were often given hoods or bags over their heads to keep them from knowing who they were having forced sex with. It could be somehow they know, perhaps a niece. Let me start that over. It could be somehow they know, perhaps a niece, aunt, sister, or their own mother. The breeders only wanted a child that could be sold. Man, and there's laws in the scriptures against this, and that's what this devil does. Have us to keep going off about with our law. Let's see. He said a niece, aunt, sister, or their own mother. Let me get the law on that. On the aunt, you have Leviticus chapter 18, verses 12 and 13. All right. It says, "Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy father's sister. She is thy father's near kinswoman." That's your auntie. It says, "Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy mother's sister, for she is thy mother's nearest kinswoman." So yes, that's the auntie. Law against that. And uncovering their nakedness is having sex with them. But, Esau was forcing us to do this. Okay? And if not, you either beaten or put to death. All right? Regarding the sister, Leviticus 8 and 9. Slide right up here. Leviticus chapter 18, verse 9. The nakedness of thy sister, the daughter of thy father, or daughter of thy mother, whether she be born at home or born abroad, even their nakedness thou shalt not uncover. Okay, so that's your sister. Okay, we're not supposed to have sex with her, but Esau forced us to do it. All right, he's going to have to pay for that. All right, making us break the law. That's how they, we broke the law ourselves, but he furthered that affliction, as it says, from the Lord and himself, about having us break the law. Zechariah 1:15. Okay, and then regarding the mother, that's Leviticus 18:7. All right. It says, the nakedness of thy father or the nakedness of thy mother thou shalt not uncover. She is thy mother. Thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. So, man, yeah, they were forcing us to do this. Back in the day, all for profit. All for profit. All right. Back to the article. All right. It says, Richmond also had 5 railroads. Slaves could be shipped both by rail and boat, which allowed slaves to arrive in between condition. Oh, Slovakia. Let's start that over. Richmond also had 5 railroads. Slaves could be shipped both by rail and boat, which allowed slaves to arrive in better condition and thus fetch a higher price. Slavery was more than man's inhumanity towards man. It was always about economics. Cheap labor that allowed America to compete with other nations. And when you hear, this nation was built upon our backs, that's literal. That's why they never let us go. The scriptures say that. Jeremiah, let me grab that. Jeremiah 50:33. They could not prosper without us. Okay. This is the book of Jeremiah, chapter 50, verse 33. Thus saith Yahweh Bashem Yahushua of hosts, the children of Israel, that's the northern kingdom, and the children of Judah, the southern kingdom, were oppressed together, and all that took them captives held them fast. They refused to let them go. Verse 34. So yeah, talking about deporting us back. Nah, that ain't gonna happen. They generated too much money, and pretty much now that they're done with us, they're repealing the, in reverse order, the 15th, 14th, and the 13th Amendments to either put you back in slavery. It says, verse 34, their Redeemer, that's Yahweh Shai, is strong. Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai of hosts is his name. Okay, Yahweh being the name of the Father, meaning he exists. Okay, Bahashem meaning in the name. Yahweh Shai, the name of the Son, meaning he saves, he delivers. Okay, I'm going to start that from the top again. Jeremiah 50 verse 34. Their Redeemer is strong. The Lord of hosts is his name. He shall thoroughly plead their cause, that he may give rest to the land and disquiet the inhabitants of Babylon, which is America. Okay? Yeah, this place is going to be put to a stop for good, permanently. All right? Back to the article. All right. Says it was always about economics, cheap labor that allowed America to compete with other nations. Much of America was literally built on slavery. Okay, Texas school books are now trying to make it sound not quite so bad. The breeding farms receive no mention at all. All right, so hey, That's about it. That's it for the article. Like I said, I'll put a link to this article in the description box. All right. You can get to see, you know, it's like 123 responses on it. Okay. You can get to see that. And, hey, well, yeah, it was, as you can see, in this article and the videos, that was a horrible thing that we were put through. All right. And literally messed our lineage. Our lineage is everywhere. All right. Everywhere. For this reason. All over. Sold all over the world. Okay. But, Manifest Destiny definitely has a part two. This is the book of Colossians, chapter 3 and verse 25. And it reads, But he that doeth wrong shall receive for the wrong which he hath done. And there is no respect of persons. None. All right. In other words, you are your ancestors. And you're going to have to pay for what your ancestors did. All right. After you serve. 1,000 years of slavery. Twice as long as twice as hard as we did, but in righteousness. Okay. You will have to pay for the iniquity of your fathers. All right. This is Isaiah 14, chapter 14, verses 21 and 22. It says, Prepare slaughter for his children for the iniquity of their fathers. You have to pay for what your forefathers did. We did. And so will you. Esau, Edom, so-called white man. So will you pay for what your forefathers did. Okay? That's what that no respect of persons. We don't give a fuck if you weren't there. You're going to have to pay. All right? It says, start back at the top. Prepare slaughter for his children for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise, nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. Once you come out of rulership this time, you will never rise up again. Okay? This is it. Enjoy it. Every major empire has a lifespan of approximately 250 years. Okay? America's about 3 weeks from that. And that's when that decline is going to accelerate. All right? Never be in rulership again. Verse 22. For I will rise up against them, saith Yahweh Bashem, Yahweh Shai of hosts, and cut off from Babylon. Okay? The name, Edom, Esau, and the remnant. Okay? The survivors, and son, and nephew, the seed line. All right? Saith the Lord. So just like it was said in Obadiah 1 and 18, Psalms 109 verses 14 and 15, your nation is going to be cut off for everything that you've done. Fuck reparations at this point. That's going to be the best one ever. Was that Sirach 25 and 7? You see the downfall of our enemies. Yeah, let me grab that. Ecclesiasticus chapter 25, I believe it's verse 7 or 9. It says, There be 9 things which I have judged in mine heart to be happy. The 10th I will utter with my tongue. A man that have joy of his children, and he that liveth to see the fall of his enemy. And that's the day we hasten for. Psalms 91, as we're being beamed up on those chariots. Scriptures say, only with our eyes will we see the reward of the wicked, and that reward is your destruction. Point blank, period. All right? So yeah, you will, like it says in that Colossians 3 and 25, he that doeth wrong shall receive for the wrong that is done. And that means the selling of your children as well to places far off. Let's get that. Joel chapter 3, beginning in verse 6. Go straight to the point. It says, the children of Judah, that's the southern kingdom, and the children of Jerusalem, the northern kingdom, have ye sold unto the Grecians. Okay, that was the Edomites. All right. That ye might remove them far from their border. Okay, which was Israel. Okay, the land of Israel. All right. Now we have not been there. That scriptures Curses said he was there. You will see it no more. All right. Once we were sold off. Verse 7 says, behold, I will raise them out of their place whither ye have sold them, everywhere we've been scattered to, and will return your recompense upon your own head. And here's the point. Remember, he that doeth wrong shall receive for the wrong which he have done. Verse 8, and I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the children of Judah, and they shall sell them to the Sabians, to a people far off. For Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai has spoken it. And we know when the Lord speaks his word, it does not return to him void. Yes, your children will be sold off. Okay? Now, of course, here's the thing. When we're in the kingdom like that, you know, you Edomite women are showing it already because you're sick of your own man. Yes, we're going to take the best of you. The ones built like, what's that actress name? Bryce Dallas Howard. Yeah. You will be servants and concubines and will be forwarding, help repopulating the nation of Israel. Okay. Whereas the ones of you that are built and look like, what's her name? Rosie O'Donnell. Those are the ones we're going to sell. Those are the ones we're going to sell. But the ones, built like Bryce Dallas Howard, yeah. Yeah, you got a lot of Edomite women that are built like Jake women. Naturally, too. So just know, only time you're going to get a good look at your feet is when they're next to your head or over your head, point blank, period. Yes, you will be, help repopulating our nation. Yep. And that's going to be righteous. You get what you put out. All right. This is the book of Revelation, chapter 18. Go straight to the point, verses 5 and 6. For her sins, this is talking about Babylon the Great, America, have reached unto heaven, and Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai hath remembered her iniquities. Didn't I read that in Psalms 109, verses 13 through 15? Yeah. This is verse 6. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. So what you did to us, you're going to get it twice as hard and twice as long, but in righteousness. All right? Point blank, period. There's no way around this. There's no getting out of this. Okay? You have hardened your heart when it comes to reparations. Now it's going to be done Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai's way. And this is how. Righteous recompense. All right. Same book of Revelation. Chapter 13. Beginning in verse 9. And it reads, if any man have an ear, let him hear. If any man have understanding, let him understand. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. Who led us into captivity to this very day? Esau, Edom. All right? To this very day. All right? Baruch 2 let you know that. As like Baruch chapter 2 and chapter 3. All right? It says, he that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Whose blessing was the sword? Esau, Edom's. Okay, Genesis chapter 27, verses 38 through 41. All right. So the same way you got rid of us, we're going to get rid of you in righteousness. Okay. It says, here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Okay. Who is that talking about? That's the Israelites. Only the Israelites can have faith. That's a gift. The scriptures say, whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Okay. Really, the only people who can commit sin are the Israelites. All right. Because what is sin? It's transgression of the law. 1 John 3 and 4. Who was given a law? Jacob, the Israelites. Psalms 147, verses 19 and 20. All right. And who are the saints? Also the Israelites. Psalms 50 and 5. Psalms 148 and 14. All right. So, yeah. So with that, I hope this lesson was edifying to the elect body of the nation of Israel. Once again, I'm going to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rahakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well in teaching me this 100% truth. Salutations to them and my fellow Archium who labor in this truth week in and week out on the highways and byways. Also, salutations to the hopeful elect of the scattered 12 tribes of Israel, scattered to the four corners of the earth, that be like unto the speckled bird, also known as your Israelite foreigners and your so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. To you, I say Shalom, Kwam Yasharala, Abba Baba. We got next. For sure. Shalom.